Hello and welcome to the second video in this very short unseen poetry series. If you're watching this video, make sure that you're doing the AQA GCSE in English Literature, because this video is very specifically about how to answer the second unseen poetry question on that course. So if you're doing a different exam board, then this is not the video for you. It will confuse you, so make sure you're doing the AQA course. So there's two questions on unseen poetry on this particular exam. The first question gives you one poem, that's in the previous video, and the second question gives you two poems. The first will be the same as you've already dealt with, and the second will be a new poem, and you need to compare these two poems. So the question looks a little bit like this. In both Break, Break, Break and Remember Me, the speakers describe loneliness after losing a loved one. What are the similarities and/or differences between the methods the poets use to present this loneliness? And we have 8 marks for this question. You need to write about both poems. It's a comparative question. If you don't write about one poem, you'll lose lots of marks. So make sure you at least mention both poems at the very, very least. You need to compare the poems, but make sure you check what the question's asking for. It might ask for similarities, it might ask for differences, or it might give you the freedom to do both. The question specifies methods. Now this is a little bit different from all the other questions that are on the literature course, where they ask you to write about how the writer does something. On this question, it very much specifies that we're writing about methods. So a method is a choice of words or a choice of structural technique. You'll do this loads in every single question, but we need to be really precise with this one to get the marks. So do the poets use natural imagery? Do they both use a rhetorical question? Do they both direct the poem at a particular person? Of course, if we can look at differences as well, does one poem use natural imagery and one poem uses scientific imagery or mechanical imagery? Is one written in the first person and one in the third person? So as long as you're identifying methods and you're doing what you do for every essay anyway, then you're on solid ground. It might give you a theme or a topic and 8 marks, so we're looking at about 2 comparative paragraphs. So we get the first poem. We've already read this poem for the previous question, so I'm not going to go over this. Watch the other video if you haven't done that already. We also get a second poem, and here we've got Remember Me by Christina Rossetti. So we'll just start by reading this. Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, where you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me, when no more day by day you tell me of our fortune that you planned. Only remember me. You understand it will be late to counsel then or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that I once had, better by far you should forget and smile, than that you should remember and be sad. So as with all of our texts, the first thing to do is just get a handle on what it's about. Do not rush the reading, because if you rush reading the poem and you write about something that you haven't really understood, then that's really going to show up in your answer. So one way to do this is to ask yourself the 5 W's. So who, what, where, when, and why. So as who is in this poem? Well, we have the speaker who is dying perhaps, and her loved one. Where are they? That's not really specified in the poem. We get a sense of quite an intimate setting, but we don't get a particular place. When was the poem written? You won't get the specific date or the context of the poem in the exam. We can tell by the language that this is quite old-fashioned. It is 19th century. That might be relevant if you're thinking about particular gender expectations or social class. What are they doing or talking about? Well, the speaker is asking her lover to remember her when she dies, but she doesn't want her lover to be overwhelmed by that sadness. And why is this happening? Well, Rossetti is articulating the lasting pain of loss, but also reminding her lover that they need to recall good memories. The first thing we need to do is plan our answer. Because we're looking at 2 texts here, I've got a table with 2 columns just to help me to visualise it a little bit more easily. I'm going to look at the poem separately first, and then I'm going to link them together. So in terms of Break, 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 I'm going to talk about the direct address in the poem, reaching out to a listener, where he says break, break, break to the sea. I think I might also mention repetition and circular structure here. You know, this idea of being trapped in a cycle of loneliness is quite important. I'm going to write about isolation from others as well, because obviously that links to this theme of loneliness, and how the speaker feels separated from other people who are in a community, and the speaker himself is by himself. He's alone, isn't he? So isolation from others, he shouts with his sister, and he sings in his boat. Okay, and I don't need a third idea, but it's always good to have a few different options to play around with. So I'm going to say about longing to be with the loved one. Oh, for the touch of a vanished hand and the sound of a voice that is still. And that's relevant to this idea of loneliness, because obviously it's about him longing to be with another person, him wanting to be with the person that he has lost. Okay, moving on to the second poem then, and we're going to start thinking about how she's commanding her loved ones to remember her. So she says, remember me when I am gone away. That's also got some repetition in it, because that phrase remember me is repeated throughout the poem. And then we've got kind of physical distance from her loved one, so I'm going to put that in as well. Okay, there we go. I've probably got enough ideas there to kind of get along with. I need 2 comparative paragraphs for this answer, so I've got enough there. I'm now going to draw some lines to link the ideas together, so just get a line ready. This idea of direct address, reaching out to a listener, trying to overcome that sense of loneliness, links in with the first point in the second poem. So I'm going to draw a line there linking those 2 together. And then I need another line. I'm just deciding which of the ideas from break, break, break I'm going to use. I think I might go for that third idea there and link that with this one from the Rossetti poem. I'm just going to ignore this one for now. Okay, so that is my plan. Now I'm going to write my essay. It's quite a short answer. I've probably got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the absolute most, and I'm going to be aiming to write 2 comparative paragraphs, and I'm going to link the poems together as I go. So I'm going to do that by starting with the word both, so foregrounding the fact that I'm looking at both poems. So both poems use the image of physical closeness and separation in order to express the longing to be with another person and the loneliness when the loved one has passed away. Now, thinking about the question that we've been asked, it's about loneliness, so I've got that word in there. The question is very specifically asking about methods as well, so we need to really foreground that too. So I've mentioned that in my opening sentence. I'm going to zoom in on Tennyson now and deal with that poem first. So Tennyson's speaker wishes for the touch of a vanished hand and the sound of a voice that is still. I've got the quotation there, and then I'm going to start to unpeel that quotation, delving into the layers of the language, getting under the skin of the poem. So the nouns touch and sound suggest that the speaker would be content with even the smallest of interactions that would remind them of his loved one's character, whilst the sound of a voice communicates the importance of a personal emotional connection. So all I'm doing here is picking some of the words out of the quotation and thinking, right, what is it that the writer means by that? Obviously, you will not have done this with a teacher in a lesson for these unseen texts, so just go with your gut instinct, be confident that you know what you're doing. The examiner will reward you if you're thinking on your feet, if you're really having a go at looking at connotations and symbolism and so on. What you don't want to do is kind of hold back because you're worried that you're going to get it wrong. Then I'm just going to add a little bit more. So however, and longing is juxtaposed with the adjectives vanished and still, which remind the reader that any connection with the loved one is now completely impossible. Both of these words are also euphemistic. A euphemism is when you don't quite say what you mean, you try to soften that a little bit. So for example, a story that I often tell my classes is that when I was 10 years old, my cat died and it was run over in a car accident, which was very messy and brutal. And my dad said to me that my cat had gone to a better place. So this idea of kind of softening things which are maybe a little bit difficult to take. So both of these words are euphemistic, implying that the speaker is unable to fully face the harsh reality of death. I think that's probably enough about the first poem. What you don't want to do is forget to write about the second poem or run out of time for the second poem, which means that you won't be able to pick up all of your marks. So I'm going to link it to the second poem. Pay attention to the question. It might ask for similarities or differences or leave you open to write about both. So here I'm going to write about similarities. So similarly in Remember Me, the speaker tells her lover of a time when you can no more hold me by the hand. As in break, 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 the touch of the hand implies physical closeness and love as well as an emotional connection. Digging into the language a little bit more, Rossetti emphasises this by choosing the verb hold, which has connotations of care, gentleness and love. Now I'm going to look at a little bit of a difference as well. Yet Rossetti's speaker is talking directly to her lover while she still can, whilst Tennyson's speaker is unable to speak to his loved one. What's really important is that I'm continually thinking about methods and comparing the methods that the different authors are using. So here I'm thinking about the perspective of the poems, first person, second person, and who they're directed to, because the question is asking us really specifically to comment on those methods. What am I saying here? Yeah. So Rossetti's poem is also in the future tense, whilst Tennyson's is in the past tense. Okay, so there's another comparison of methods. But what's important to remember is that you don't just identify the method or the difference or the similarity of the method, but you also explain why the writer does that. So I'll go on to do that now. So despite the fact that one poem is written before death and one poem is written after a death, both have an extremely poignant tone and communicate the sadness of human mortality. Okay, I think that's definitely enough, probably more than enough for my first paragraph, and then you would aim to do a second paragraph as well, in which if you have time. What you need to remember, and that I've highlighted as I've been modelling this, is identifying those language and structural techniques, but also so important to show what the writers are intending those techniques to mean. So why have they chosen particular metaphors, particular adjectives, particular verbs? Why have they used direct address or a particular tense and so on? Thanks very much for watching this video, everybody. Head over to amysmithliterature.wordpress.com and you'll be able to find some more resources to help you in your revision.